Hello and welcome to week 3 of the MMO development live class. Today I'm going to be here and my name is Nelson. So what we're going to be doing today is, let me go ahead and actually fire up the solution, which would be very handy. Yeah, what NATO said, basically. I actually just realized how what I said earlier could have been taken in the wrong way. So what we have so far is we have a very basic implementation of a server and client where we have our server written in Photon using the Photon operation request stuff and the parameter dictionary and all of those things. The problem that we're going to run into, though, that we've already started to see with our code, if I go ahead and fire up Unity, if I go ahead and fire up Unity harder, well, that's not good. Hold on, I think I know what's wrong with it. Let me jump into you. So today we're starting off the class with Unity crashing. Wrong one. What? Yeah, I could open up the log folder. That would be a helpful thing to do. However, what I think is wrong with it is earlier I was working on a local Git branch, and I'm quite possibly what's going on is, well, there's a stack trace, and this is, oh, look, okay. Yeah, well, it's loading a bunch of stuff, and it crashed. Weird. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kill my library folder. Because I was working on a local Git branch, and then I switched back to that Git branch, but my library folder in Git is actually ignored. And what that could cause is the cache in the library folder being maybe misaligned for some reason. So I'm just going to nuke the contents of the library folder. Because I can do this because I have external version control set. If I didn't, then this would be problematic. So just give it a sec to get rid of that. And then when I launch Unity, what it should do is tell me that it's rebuilding my assets. Hopefully, if it launches. Yep, importing assets. And okay, so just a side note for everybody, if you like using Git to its fullest capacity and make use of Git local development branches, and you find that your project no longer starts, just go ahead and nuke the library folder. But again, like I said earlier, this will only work if you have external version control set, and by re-importing all your assets, it does take a few seconds. Fortunately for me, because I have very few assets, it only, well, took a second, but I've seen Unity projects where it takes like an hour to re-import all the assets into the library folder. But just to verify that everything worked properly, I'm going to jump over to my scene 1 and make sure that my association between my game manager and my camera is still there, which it is. If I didn't have external version control selected, this association would no longer be there. So, yeah, I guess we got started off with a good little tip for dealing with Unity wonkiness. So what I was trying to do is I was trying to launch my game manager because I had a thought like 5 minutes ago that I was expressing, and then that thought kind of got derailed due to crashing. So give this a sec to open in Visual Studio. Also notice I am running at a slightly lower resolution today. I'm going to try this resolution and see if it works better for people, especially the people who are watching the videos. So just let me know wherever. So like I was saying before, we have a very basic use of Photon right now, but all of our code is pretty much all mashed up into a combination of the Rune peer and into our game manager. And this becomes problematic because as our code base grows, we'll run into a situation where these two files will get very, very, very large. So what I want to do is I want to abstract the way commands work. And when I say command, what I'm referring to is an operation request. So if we think about what an operation request is it's really just a type, as in which operation request we want to send. It's a collection of parameters, such as username, password, and email. And it's a response, which can be an error or a success, or in some instances, we might want to actually send data back to the client, which my system currently doesn't allow for because the send success method just sends a success message. So what I want to do is I want to abstract the idea of a command as an object that represents a operation and a, notification, I need to close this. See, normally I would feel bad about doing this sort of stuff off screen, but this is a over-the-shoulder look, so I'm going to fall back to that as an excuse. So we need a command that represents what type of operation we want to send, what data that operation contains, and the potential for a response that the operation can send back. Fortunately, we're working with an object-oriented language, so it should be fairly straightforward to represent those different things. So, yeah, that's basically what we're going to be doing today, is abstracting the concept of a command so that we can get our register and login methods to be a lot more cleaner and more object-oriented. So we are going to be running into a problem with serialization. I did cheat and spend a few minutes here looking at the Photon documentation earlier about their serialization engine, which I was familiar with, like last year or the year before, but kind of forgot about. And the problem is that serialization engine pretty much allows for the passing of these untyped dictionaries, which we've seen in the form of the parameters dictionary. It allows for the passing of classes that inherit from a particular base type. And it also allows for custom serialization that's just responsible for serializing an object into a byte array. Now, all of these options I don't consider to be valid for what we want to do. I don't want to pass around things in an untyped dictionary. That seems kind of gross. I don't want to force my command objects to inherit from a particular base type. And not only that, there's other limitations in regards to that solution that makes it also less desirable. If it had redeeming factors, I wouldn't mind, but because it doesn't, I'm not going to use that option. Further, in addition, I don't want to use their custom or quote-unquote custom serialization thing because that also necessitates that we make use of things like operation codes, which I kind of want to get away from in a sense. So what we're going to be using is, well, basically what I usually default back onto for serialization, which is JSON.NET. We're going to be sending a binary JSON between the server and the client. Now you might say, oh, that's really inefficient, and the answer is yes and no. It depends on what you're doing. For the Rune game, it's not going to be a problem at all. For an MMO, it would become a problem. But the good thing about what I'm about to do is that the level of the abstraction that I'm introducing with the commands today will make it very easy to refactor our serialization into a better format in the future. Now, that format in the future, what I'm planning on doing is I already have something written. I just want to get everybody's kind of feedback into if you guys are interested in this or not. I do have a project that I was working on a while ago that I do want to do on video during this class. I'm just wondering if people are interested. What I want to do is when we get a functional game, I want to take a few MMO sessions, 1 or 2 MMO sessions, and go through building this and finishing it off. What this is it's a custom serialization engine that I wrote that's very similar to Protobuf, but is more .NET frameworky than Protobuf and allows for more complex scenarios without sacrificing performance. what it actually does is it uses the, where are you? There we go. This isn't pretty code, but it really can't be pretty code. What it does is it actually takes a type, or an object graph, and turns it into a compiled .NET method that serializes and deserializes parameters in binary. And it's very quick and it's very lean. It's about as lean as protobuf itself, but it provides a lot of nicer features than protobuf and makes it a lot easier to work with in .NET. So if people are interested, we can definitely put aside a couple of classes to go over this. I know not everybody will be interested in this because it's a very frameworky type thing, and I also know that some people who might not be interested in MMO content would be interested in this. So that's coming down at some point. But just here are the tests and stuff like that. So I just want to point out for anybody who's just paying close attention to what I'm saying here that I'm completely aware that binary JSON is not a very compact serialization scheme. I'm fully aware of that, and I understand that in a real-time game you wouldn't want that, but I want to focus on game logic right now. I want to focus on other concerns right now, so that's what we're going to be using, and it's not going to cause any problems for Rune game. But what's a good option for an MMO scale serialization? Well, at that point you're going to be wanting to look at making your code incredibly ugly by passing around these dictionaries. Your code will suffer. Or you would want to look at a binary serialization engine like protobuf, or what I'm talking about. Now, protobuf is a very interesting protocol. The problem with it is that it has two .NET implementations, and both of them don't really feel like they're in the spirit of .NET, as in they don't support certain things that I want to support, like polymorphic enumerations and stuff like that. And they have very weird support for serializing with constructors and stuff like that. So I've spent a lot of time with both implementations of protobuf for .NET, but I wasn't impressed with either, which is why this happened. Just is really fun code to write, and it will be interesting to get back to it and finish it up. I mean, I'm already to the point where I can serialize and deserialize with constructors. I can serialize and deserialize enumerables with complex types. I believe the last thing I was working on that I didn't get quite working was serialization of polymorphic enumerables, but yeah. How's the support for gzip? I don't know if Photon has built-in support for gzip, but there's nothing stopping you from performing gzip compression. I mean, it's just code. There's a gzip library that you can grab off NuGet that'll perform that compression for you. Anyway, so like I said, in the spirit of this being an over-the-shoulder look at development, I'm just going to show you guys kind of the process that I would go through when trying to develop something where I would take existing code and make it better. So what I want to do here is I'm just going to be stubbing out some code. That's probably the most effective method of design for me anyway. I know a lot of people might like UML diagrams or whiteboarding or stuff like that. Personally, I just like stubbing out code. Create a local branch in your Git repository, or just don't push these changes if they're just designy type stuff. But toss in some code, play around, and see what it looks like. So that's what I'm going to start off with. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put an abstract namespace in my RuneSlinger base. And the reason I'm doing that is because I need a iCommand. Now, what's an iCommand? It is nothing more than an interface that can be used to mark a particular object as a command. So I'm not actually going to fill it in with any members, but I like having these sort of marker interfaces, quote unquote, that allow me to, declaratively say that a particular class is a command or an event or something like that. And then if I needed to add additional properties that were available on old commands, then I could do that through this interface. However, this command object only will see, there's a lot of things going in my mind right now that's kind of difficult to present, but what I'm thinking about right now is how exactly will the client API look. So to make this client API a little bit better, I do know that commands will have potential responses, and I do want to take care take advantage of .NET's type engine in order to make my code cleaner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have an iCommand interface, but then I'm going to create another iCommand interface. And you'll notice that the file name of this iCommand interface has a tick in it. That's typically used when you have a non-generic and a generic type. You would put in a tick, or if you had multiple generic types, you would put like a tick 1 or a tick 2, depending on how many generic parameters you have. But in this case, we only have one generic type. So I said it's generic, and that's going to have a T response. And again, the reason I'm doing this is I'm just looking down the road of how my client code is going to look. And I want my client code to be as simple as possible. I want to be able to do something like send command, new login command, username, password, result, and then a lambda. I want the code to look like that. Well, how can I make the code look like that? Well, I can take advantage of generic type inference on this, because what I could do is if the login command implements an interface of iCommand that has a generic parameter, I can actually have send command extract that generic parameter during compile time and apply it to a delegate type. So I can make the code look like this without introducing any repetition. So that's my justification for having that. Then also, I guess I'll have this interface inherit from my command, just because I don't really know what that's going to do later down the line. It should make, it should make things a lot easier. Again, I'm just I'm just throwing code at the IDE and seeing what looks good. I'm going to turn off .NET Daemon, which I can't. Okay, there we go. I guess I needed to be reminded that I was off because previously I was building my projects where I don't want it to. So here's our iCommands, and that's about it. So what would a command look like? Well, here's what I want a command to look like. I want all my commands need to be in my base project, and the reason they need to be in my base project is see, it built it again. I don't know. See, I have all of these checked off, and for some reason it keeps on building my project. I don't want that because that causes my Photon instance to restart. Maybe it just needs to be reminded that it's actually off and not on. Okay, let's try this again. So my commands namespace needs to be available on both my server and my client, because my server needs to know what commands are available, and so does the client, so they need to go in the base project. So let's step out a login command. What's the login command going to look like? Well, a login command is going to be a login command, but I'm also going to need a login response. The login command is going to implement iCommand of login response. Yes, I'm putting two classes in the same file. I break that rule occasionally for things like this. So, yeah. Now, my login command, I know for a fact, is going to be serialized. It's going to need to be sent. This object is going to need to be instantiated by the client, sent to the server, and reconstructed on the server. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do string email, string password. Now, because I've already said that I'm going to be using Bison with the JSON.NET serialization framework, I happen to know for a fact that this class will be properly serializable and deserializable. This class will also be properly serializable and deserializable using the serialization engine that I want to build at some point. The reason it's going to be serializable and deserializable is because it has two properties, but these properties have a private setter. JSON.NET will not use reflection to override private setters by default, But what it will do is if you have a constructor that has similarly named parameters, it will hook up these parameters to these properties. So for example, email property will go into, or this email property will go into that, and blah, blah, blah. So this will work. If I had the parameter email named parameter email 123, it would not work. So keep in mind that I'm constructing this class knowing that it's going to be serialized, but when you do that, you have to have the knowledge of what framework you're going to be using to serialize with and what constraints that framework might have. So what's going to be my login response? Well, a login response is going to return the email. It's going to return username. Now all of a sudden I can't type. And it's going to return an ID. Alt insert inner space inner to generate that constructor. So here's my login command, here's my login response. So I'm liking the way that this is looking. I think that through my ability to use type inference in order to make my client API really interesting, and the fact that I'm able to create a command that accepts constructor parameters as opposed to just public setters on my properties, I think that this will work really well. So the next question is how am I going to have this handled by the server? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an abstract namespace on my server. And I'm going to be using a pattern that I have no idea what it's called, but it's a thing that's been in use for years now in the .NET development community, maybe even longer. Let me show you what it looks like. I'm going to create an interface called iCommandHandler. iCommandHandler is going to have a generic type parameter of tCommand with the generic type constraint of tCommand being a type that implements iCommand, which, if you recall, both the generic and non-generic versions that this type do. Now the command handler is going to have a void handle method that takes in a tCommand. So the way that my command handler objects are going to look like is I'm going to create another namespace called command handlers. And I'm going to create a class called login handler that's going to implement iCommandHandler of type login command. So that looks good, but we're missing something. So how's everyone feeling about this so far? The issue with the login response is it doesn't have the fail response. That's getting very close to what we're missing. I want the command handler is going to have to know a couple of things. It's going to be able to have to do a couple of things. It's going to be able to have to send errors and successes and results back to the peer. And it's also going to have knowledge of the peer, and it's going to have the ability to look at the global application object to do different things. I'm going to worry about validation at first because we're building kind of a command pattern right now. I would just want to focus on building that, and I have another idea for handling the concept of a global application object and peers that have a lot more functionality than they do right now. So for right now, I'm just going to worry about validation. The way I typically handle this is with a concept called a command context. And a command context is capable of raising different kinds of errors or setting responses. So what I'm going to do, need either a dispatcher or a container. Yep, we'll be building a dispatcher. I'm not going to be worrying about IOC today. So what we're going to need to do is create the concept of a command context. The command context, like I said, is going to be responsible for holding things like errors and results that can then be serialized and sent back to the client. Now, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a command context class within my server, and then I'm going to have another command context class within my, or not a command context, but a command result in my client, just to keep things simple so I don't have to worry about making a command context that is serializable, because that's going to cause problems with the way I'm kind of envisioning this code to look. So in my RuneSlinger.server, I'm going to create a class called command context. What does my command context need? Well, command context is going to need a set result method. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm kind of getting ahead of myself because I've written similar code so many times. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to kind of show you guys how I would stub this out if I were designing this for the first time. So I have my command context, which needs to be passed along to my command handlers. So the easiest way to do that is to add the command context as a parameter to the handle method for my command handler. Now that I've done that, obviously my login handler is going to be invalid, so I'm going to have to add that parameter here too. So what do I want this code to look like? Well, I'm going to jump back into my Rune peer and take a look at my login method. So here's my login method. So what so far do I need? Well, I do need the session, which I don't have. What I'm going to do here is, I know we're not doing IOC yet, so I'm just going to create an iSession parameter, which we will manually resolve from the Rune peer level later. And then I'm going to stub out, what do I want my handle method to look like? See, that's the great thing about designing code, is I'm writing this against code that doesn't exist yet. I'm just trying to get a feel for, what should my framework look like? What sort of features do I need? You know, what are these methods? What will these methods look like, and what code do I need to write to make these methods look the way I want them to? So I kind of like the idea of something like this. Is null or white space command.username or email. So yeah, I think that's going to be a very sensible way to implement methods like this, and it gives me a lot of a lot of functionality built in. So basically, what I've discovered over the many years that I've been doing stuff like this with web development is that you generally have two types of errors. You have property errors and operation errors, and the difference should be fairly straightforward based off the code you guys are looking at right here. So if we have an error with a property, we raise a property error. If we have an error with the overall operation, we raise an operation error. And then finally, if we get to the end, we set a response. So I'm really liking the way this API sort of looks from the perspective of the code we're going to be writing for this API. Now, before I move on and actually implement these methods, I do want to point out something about what I'm doing and where I'm putting code. You guys may have noticed that I am mixing my frameworky code with my application code, and that's going to be true for today and maybe next week and so on. But once we start to solidify our code base, I'm going to be moving these off into a different project. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm keeping them all kind of combined at the moment because I don't have to worry about references and other stuff like that at the moment. Again, this is all very I'm just discovering the stuff as I go along as far as how I want to put this together. So now that, because I have ReSharper installed, I can go ahead and have ReSharper generate my methods for me. Now we have a problem. The problem is my set response. I don't really want this to be an object response, just because I feel it's kind of bad API design. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create another quote stub unquote interface that'll allow me to kind of mark my response classes as command responses. So to do that, I'm going to create an abstract, or in my abstract namespace of my base project, I'm going to create an I command response, which is going to contain nothing. But I am going to jump over into my generic command type and add a constraint where the T-response has to implement iCommand response, which of course is going to cause my login command to fail because my login response does not implement that interface. So let's go ahead and make login response implement iCommand response. And by doing that, I can jump back into my command context. Instead of doing object response, I can now do command response. So here's my command context, or at least the public API of my command context. And why is ReSharper yelling at me? Oh, shut up. Okay, so what do we need to contain the data that this API is going to be given? Well, we need a dictionary of string and string, or how about string and list of strings? I like that, that seems nicer. And call this property errors. Then we're going to need a private read-only list of string called operation errors. Then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that. For my property error dictionary, I do kind of want the key to be case insensitive. So undercase error and uppercase error will be the same. So to do that, I'm going to, for the iEquality compare, for the key compare, I'm going to pass in string compare dot current culture ignore case. So that'll make my dictionary case insensitive. So now I have to fill out these methods, and all they're going to be doing is setting these objects. So operation errors, this will be the simplest one. Operation errors.add message. Raise property error is going to be a little bit more complicated. I'm going to create a helper method called private list of string get property errors string property. All this method is going to do is it's going to try to get a list of string out of my dictionary. So I'm going to say if, or I can just say return property errors, try get value property out property errors, and then I can go ahead and say ternary return property errors, otherwise return property errors at property equals new list of string. So what this code will do is it will simply say, well, if there's a list of string already at this particular key, return it, otherwise create a new list of string and assign it to this key index and then return that expression. So now I can say get property errors at name dot add message. And that becomes my method. Final thing is I'm going to need a response, but I'm going to make that public. I'm going to say public iCommand response get private set response equals response. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one more property called public bool is valid. Is valid will simply return if there are any errors. So I'm going to say return operation errors.any or property errors.any tt value.any. So this says return true if there are any operation errors, or return true if there are any property errors. So yeah, here's our command context. And there are some discussions going on in BuzzNet, but I'll get to that after break, because I kind of want to see how the rest of the code's going to be looking. So here's our login handler. So that should be good. Now, there should be one obvious problem with this particular handler. I'm not actually setting anything server-side that's specifying that this particular peer is now authenticated. But that's fine, because like I said, that's going to lead into an idea for a design that I kind of have that I want to do later, but not right now. And later, I mean later today, hopefully. So now we have a single command implemented and a single command handler implemented, but you guys might notice that this code isn't actually going to do anything because it's not wired up anywhere. So we need two things now. We need the Rune peer to now be able to work with the new frameworky type thing that I built with the command context, and we need our Rune client to be able to, well, send commands and detect errors. So where should we start? Well, I'm going to start by deleting all this code, because I can. Because that code is now going to be rewritten using a command interface as opposed to this. Like I said before, this was just a quick get up and running sort of thing, but now we're making things a little bit nicer. So the first thing I need to do is I need to figure out, well, I still need to send those parameter dictionaries, and I still need to send operation codes and operation response codes and stuff like that. But there's fewer that I need to implement. So if I jump into Rune operation codes, instead of register, login, and send message, all I need really is dispatch command. Because I'm basically overriding the way that Photon deals with operation code. So the only operation code I care about right now is dispatch command. As far as operation code parameters, let's do command type and then command bytes, because those are the only two parameters that I really need to sorry, keep on getting distracted from the chat. These are the only two parameters I'm going to need to send in each operation code. My operation response is going to be invalid. I still need that. Error and fatal error and success, I'm no longer going to be passing back in the response. Instead, I want to just say invalid and command dispatched. Then if I look at my Rune operation response parameters, what I need here is, let's say I need command response, which will be the object, for example, my login command response object or class. And then I'm also going to need a things like my operation errors and my property errors. So let's do operation errors property errors. And that's about it. Hold on, so basically for a multiplayer game that is an MMO, it's better to do it this way, and an MMO, it's better to how we're doing it. No, you misunderstand what I was saying earlier. So far, the code that I'm writing is not going to be significantly or really in any way less performant, or it can, I should rephrase that, it can be made to be as performant or very, very near to be as performant as what we were doing before. But those aspects of this performance I'm not worrying about right now. I'm not worrying about having a a very snazzy binary serialization format, for example. I'm going to be using binary JSON, but that's still pretty, it's pretty heavyweight compared to what you would really want. Right. I mean, Coward's saying you don't want to saturate the network because that's more than important to get those commands going between as fast as possible. Right. You don't want to saturate the network with unnecessary data. but we're not going to be sending unnecessary data once the new serialization format is in place. That's basically what I'm saying. Does that make sense? Oh, I still kind of want a fatal error. So let's do invalid fatal error and command dispatched. But did what I just say about, you know, the bottleneck here isn't the code that's being written right now. It's the code that we're not writing, because we're not writing our own serialization at this point. We're just using what I happen to know will work very well for what we're doing. Yeah, the thing about networking is the number one bottleneck for networking is always going to be how many connections you open, which fortunately we're only going to be opening one. That's not like this is HTTP, and also the size of the data that you're sending. So if adding like 1 or 2 or even less milliseconds or nanoseconds to command processing is going to hardly make a difference, but adding 1 or 2 bytes to a message that tells you where a player is positioned will make a difference, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's go ahead and now that I have all of my parameters stuff all figured out, let's rewrite the Rune peer, which again, I did nuke all that code, but if you guys are following along, you better be using source control. And let's go ahead and write this up. So what I'm going to do is, the first thing I'm going to do, because I only support one operation code right now, I'm going to say if operation request dot operation code does not equal cast a byte rune operation code dot dispatch command, then I'm going to send operation response, new operation response, byte, rune operation response. This is so redundant, which is why I hate it so much. Invalid, send parameters, return, and how about we log something out? Warn format, peer sent unknown operation code, blah. And blah is going to be operation code or operation request operation code. So it's good that we only have to write this once, because like last week, I was sitting there typing out this ridiculously heavyweight code, and I was like, blah. So I'm still going to open a session and open a transaction to the database. That will change later, but not right now. So what I'm going to do is the first thing I need to do is detect which command was sent to the server. There's multiple ways to do that. I'm just going to cheat right now, just for the sake of simplicity. In my operation code parameters, I have my command type. That's just going to be a string that points to the type. And if anybody tells me that this is particularly bloated, I will refer them back to the discussion I had about 5 minutes ago. So yeah, don't tell me that this is bloated, because I've already addressed that. So I'm going to say var command type equals, then let's do string at operation response, blah, 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 parameters of cast to byte rune operation code parameter dot command type. Then I'm going to do command bytes equals this at command bytes. So now I have two things. I have my command type and my command bytes. So let's go ahead and instantiate a command object. To do that, I'm going to need my serialization framework. So, oh yeah, I know garbage. I'm not saying that garbage collection isn't going to work. Well, in fact, this does not impact garbage collection whatsoever, because this is a string reference. Oh, this needs to be a byte array. What I was referring to is the fact that I'm passing the assembly qualified type name of the command as part of my command, which is actually a huge string. It would be better if it was a single byte, but like I said, that's not what we're worrying about right now. We're worrying about just getting this framework working, and then when we run into a performance problem, we'll address it. I don't know if I said operation response or request. Those, yeah, I have no idea. So JSON.NET. So all I did was jump into NuGet, pull down JSON.NET. And so now what I can do is I can actually go ahead and get back an iCommand object. And I'm not going to worry about handling exceptions because guess what? I have this all in a nice handy little try-catch block. So to do that, what do we do again? I forgot. See, this is an example of another bit of code that I just like wrote once and copied and pasted everywhere else. I believe you have to instantiate, I believe you have to open up Chrome and type in json.net bson and click on the first Google result. That's what you got to do. Let's see here. Okay, we need a Bison writer, and the Bison writer needs a writer, which is a, no, it needs a serializer, which is a JSON serializer. Alrighty. So I'm going to go ahead and say private read-only JSON serializer, and I'm going to add this as a field. I'm going to instantiate it in the constructor of my Rune peer. And am I going to set any properties on it? I don't know if I'm going to be setting any properties on it. Nah. The default should be fine for all the stuff I'm doing right now. I might need to revisit this though and change the configuration a little bit. So to deserialize my command bytes from a byte array and a string, all I got to do is get a memory string. So var using var ms equals new memory stream, passing in my command bytes. Then what I can do is say var command equals cast to iCommand, non-generic, and then I do JSON serializer dot deserialize. I need to pass in a JSON reader, so I can instantiate a new Bison reader, passing in my memory stream, and then I can pass in the type of the object, which is going to be type.getType command type. I'm going to put that outside of this and do that. Okay, so after doing this, I have now successfully deserialized a command using Bison, using the JSON.NET library. So now I need to dispatch it to something. Well, what I'm going to do right here I forgot. C# doesn't have an instance of operator, does it? But I can do .getType is, what am I doing? Sorry, I'm going crazy. If command is login command, then handler equals new login handler, passing in my session handler.handle, pass in my context, which I'll worry about in a second, and then pass in my command. Otherwise, throw new key not or invalid operation exception. Actually, I'm just going to pass in and do this. And then I'm going to do rollback return. And then peer sent an unknown command, and then of type or command type, and then yeah. Okay, so here's our code so far. The only thing we're missing is our command context. So that's what I'm going to do up here. Actually, the first thing I'm going to do in this try block is say var command context equals new command context. And then I'm going to pass the command context into the handle method of my login handler. And then what are you complaining about? Oh yeah, I have to cast you into a login command, don't I? Which of course I could use an as. Fine. There, the code's a little bit uglier, but I'll talk about this code in a second here. So now we have our command context. So at this point, I can say if command context is valid, or it doesn't even matter at this point. All I got to do is I got to send the response, if there is a response, back to the object or back to the client, as well as what else did I put in my on operation response? invalid, fatal error, and command dispatched. So what I can do is I can say if command context dot response does not equal null. Basically what I'm going to be doing is filling out my parameters. Dictionary of byte and object. So if the response is not equal to null, then I want to do parameters byte Rune operation response parameter dot command response equals, and then I got to actually serialize down my response. So what I'm going to do instead of that is I'm going to go ahead and write a helper method that will go ahead and serialize stuff into Bison. So I'm going to go ahead and write private byte. I don't know how to spell serialize. Give me a sec. There we go. Serialize Bison object obj add Bison to my abbreviation list. So we have serialized Bison that takes in an object and will basically just return the serialized form of that object. So to do that, I need to create a memory stream. Then I need to say JSON serializer.serialize. I need a JSON writer, so I'll just instantiate a new Bison writer, passing in my memory stream, and then I'll pass in my object value, which will be obj. And then when this is all done, what do I need to do? I need to... Don't I need to... Yeah. Maybe. Let's see what happens. Return ms.toArray. ms, what does it do? It gives me msg, mail settings, map setter. You best to just do mstream. Mstream pulls up memory stream. Yeah, basically wherever you see me doing serialization or deserialization, I'm going to be basically replacing that with this, which is, like I said earlier, a format that is pretty much as compact as protobuf, but is potentially faster and once it's finished and supports way more features. So now we have a little helper method for serialized Bison. So what I can do is say serialized Bison, passing in my command context dot response. Actually, what I also want to do, nah. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to serialize down my operation and parameter dictionaries. So in RunePeer, where did using Photon instance runtime interfaces come from? Let's see what type this depends on. This one, it's disconnect reason, requires the Photon host runtime interfaces. Honestly, since I started using Sharper, I don't know which namespaces anything comes from anymore because it just brings them in automatically, except for when there's a problem. So yeah, we have our serialized Bison. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to serialize down my command context, which represents my operation errors and property errors. But to do that, I actually have to expose my operation errors and property errors. So to expose them, I'm going to say public IEnumerable of string operation errors. And then I'm going to say public iDictionary of string and string of list of string property errors. For now, I don't have the energy to create an iRead-only dictionary interface, but remind me later sometime because this should really be an iRead-only dictionary of IEnumerables. Actually, I think through covariance I can use IEnumerable here, can I? No, I can't. It's not going to let me. But I could do, nah, that'll be too inefficient. Yeah, I don't really like this property very much, but we'll just deal with it for now. So then I'm going to do parameters at byte of rune operation response parameter dot operation errors equals serialized bison command context dot operation errors, and then I'm going to do the same thing for my property errors, doing property errors, and then at the end of this I'm going to say send operation response of type rune operation response dot command dispatch, or that's not an operation response, that's an operation code. Derp. So instantiate a new operation response, passing in a rune operation response command dispatch, and then my parameters dictionary. And then I'm just going to use the same send parameters that the client sent me. So yeah, so very straightforward. Again, I'm kind of approaching this at a do I really need this sort of perspective? Because right now, the bit that's really irritating me is this. And this irritates everybody, doesn't it? I mean, come on, look at it, it's awful. Well, it's not that bad. But what's wrong with it is we're basically having a huge if statement. So every single time we add a command in a command handler, we're going to have to add another if statement, blah, blah, blah. It's going to be very annoying. But what I do want to do here is just kind of express to you guys sort of where some things come from. And so later we're going to be looking at once we get enough commands to where people will really obviously see this code grow out of control, then I can be like, hey, look, we can use something called an IOC container, and here's what it does, as opposed to shoving that stuff down everyone's throat right now and losing everybody. So again, very straightforward stuff. So the funny thing about this this method is this method pretty much handles everything that we would ever need to send to the server, pretty much. We're going to be revisiting this method every now and then, but for now, I mean, that's all we really need, except for right here, of course, but I already told you guys how much I hated this code. So now we have to build the client. And what I'm going to do is, it's been about an hour, so I'm going to go ahead and pause the video and, well, go outside and I'll be right back. And then we'll get back and we'll look at actually building out the client. So, oh yeah, and we're back. So some discussions came in, or have been scrolling past in BuzzNet over break. And a question came in, people are obviously wondering how I envision this code ending up looking like once we get some real-time action going. And the answer to that is, I hope that the code will pretty much be like this. The strength of code like this, the command pattern. Command pattern is a very, very well-known, well-established pattern that is applicable to virtually every single project you will ever write. And the reason that is because a command is essentially a unit of functionality. And when you stop thinking about classes as data transfer objects, like the login command, this contains data. That's the easiest use case of a class. Even a person who doesn't understand OOP, I can say, hey, look, I can make a custom variable that contains these variables. And they'll be like, oh, that's kind of cool. But what we have here is we have classes that encapsulate functionality. And some of these command handlers will be long and some of them will be short. Hopefully the majority of them will be short, but still. The point is we're encapsulating all of this code. So you might look at this class and say, well, this doesn't look like very much code. Well, the answer to that concern is indeed it doesn't, because we've refactored out all of our ancillary concerns. This code does not care about how things are being deserialized. It does not care about what the client's doing really, as far as whether or not the client's even going to show this error to the user. It doesn't care about really any of that. All it cares about is performing a single unit of functionality. So it makes this code very easy to debug, very easy to view and understand. I find that in all the projects that I've done that use this sort of pattern, it's incredibly easy to go back and look at the code down the line, because you just need to find get a general idea for what you're looking for, then find a command that is similarly named to what you're looking for, and most likely you're going to find your code sitting right there. How does it affect performance? Performance for Rune game, it's not going to matter one single bit. I can instantiate 10 million objects and it's not going to matter for Rune game. Wow, excuse me. Hold on while I make a note of that so the future people don't have to hear that. So what's going on here is, like I said, for Rune game it's not going to matter. For the MMO, like I said, I might want to make it so these handlers aren't instantiated for every single invocation. Yes, we are recording. So design-wise, it'll be like sending usability slot1 command rather than use super // Well, it would be like usability command, and then the usability command would have a property saying which ability that it wants to use. So you wouldn't want to make the code like that. I mean, you wouldn't want to make a class for every, or a command for every single ability that you want to send. You would want to abstract that. So, now what were we doing? We were writing code. What kind of code were we writing? We're writing client code. So let's go ahead and write some client code. What I want to do is, I don't really like spending a lot of time in this particular project. I want to write some Photon client code. Well, do I? Nah, I'll put it in here for now. And then once it grows big and ugly and nasty, I'll say, hey, look, this is big and ugly and nasty. Here's how we can fix it. Again, as opposed to just throwing a bunch of stuff. Yeah, the client's read. What I want to do is I want to go ahead and make sure this is all built, which now it is built. I want to jump back to the client. Well, I want to jump back to Unity, make sure it re-imports the assembly. Then I want to jump back to the client. And yeah, it's all red because basically all this stuff no longer exists. So now we have to write code that will handle this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create another class. I'm going to create a network manager. What do I want? I want the network manager to be a mono behavior. I'm going to attach this onto the camera, just to bring all of our network code into a single class, as opposed to having our game manager being responsible for the UI as well as the network stuff. So he's going to be a mono behavior. And he's going to have a start method and an update method and all that fun stuff. So in reality, it's actually, I can just go ahead and copy that, paste it here, and then delete all the code that I don't want. Delete all of you. Make sure you implement iPhoton peer listener. I don't need a state. Actually, honestly, it would have been faster if I just wrote this instead of trying to copy and paste. But whatever, here's my network manager. So it's just a it's like the game manager, but just for network stuff. Now, the network manager is going to be a singleton. So I'm going to create a public static network manager instance. Instance is going to have a get private set. On the start of my network manager, I'm going to say if instance does not equal null, then debug.log error. You cannot create more than one return, and then set instance to this. Again, just a very simple pattern. It's not my particular favorite way to write code, but it's straightforward enough for what we want to do. Next thing is I'm going to go ahead and create a method. And this is the method that we are going to be spending a lot of time in. And it's going to be public void dispatch that takes in a T command. Now we have two problems. first of all, we need 2 dispatches. We need a dispatch that takes in just a T command, but we also need a dispatch that takes in an I command of T result. And this is what I was talking about earlier, where we can use the fact that the I command interface, we actually have 2 of them, one generic, one non-generic, and we can use that combined with generic type inference in order to make this API very nice. So we're going to have 2, and what are you complaining about? Oh, right, I have to say where T result is I command response. And when I said T result, I actually meant T response. I'm going to be using those interchangeably, and I'm going to try to keep them consistent. So we have 2 dispatch methods for dispatching a command object to the server so the server can perform stuff. But here's our problem. We need a way to get a response back. So what I'm going to do is, inside of my assets code, I'm going to create command context class and a command context generic class with the T response. Now, the command context of T response is going to inherit from the normal command context. What's command context going to do? Well, command context is pretty much just going to be a copy of, and arrow shake decided that because I moved that window around hard enough, it was going to minimize everything other than Visual Studio. So give me a sec while I open up every single other window that I had open. So we have our command context. It's going to be very similar to the server-side command context. I'm starting to wonder if I should just merge them into the same type. Honestly, that's just a thought that's going into my head. But for now, I'm going to not do that. So the command context is going to take in, this version is going to take in an iDictionary of string and string called property errors and an IEnumerable of string called operation errors. And it's going to assign them to these guys. Then I'm going to create a couple of methods on the command context on the client that's more appropriate for the client than it would be for the server. I'm still going to need my isValid method. And also remember, it's not a iDictionary of string, it's iDictionary of IEnumerable of string. That's because for whatever reason I decided that a property can have multiple errors. Meh. That was just an arbitrary decision that I made earlier on. So we need a couple helper methods to make our command context a little sexier, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. Instead, I'm going to go ahead and implement my other command context, my generic version, which I need to bring over this constructor so I can invoke the base constructor. But in addition, I'm going to take in a response. The response is going to be set to that. So is everybody good so far? Does everybody sort of understand where this particular class fits in with everything else? Is there a reason I'm not putting in the base library? Yes. The reason is a kind of arbitrary decision that has to kind of sort of do with the serialization of this type. The fact that this type is not going to have methods for adding operation or property errors, whereas this type or the other type will have those methods. So I kind of, in my mind, I kind of separated them as 2 different types, even though they had the same name and do almost the same thing. It might not have been the best idea, but we'll see where this goes. So now that I have the base of these 2 things done, let's go ahead and see what our dispatch methods can look like. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to basically rewrite my game manager in terms of a dispatch method that isn't yet written. In fact, I'll leave them in there, but they'll change. Their signatures will change. Ooh, we did have questions are coming in. I totally forgot to open the questions panel. Oh, Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I'll get to that at the end of. I should probably have done it at the beginning of class, but unfortunately I didn't. But yeah, I'll definitely get to that. Thanks for reminding me. And where is everybody chatting? Buzznet.3dbuzz.com. So, yes. So, like I said, the way I like to work when dealing with API type thingies is I like to, well, write the client code first and then write the framework code based off the client code, if that makes sense. So let's go ahead and rewrite my game manager in terms of the network manager that's not even written yet. And that'll give us a very good idea about where we should go with the API. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all references to Photon from my game manager. That's because the network manager is now going to be responsible for that. So that's going to bring in even more red. So what do we need to really do? We need to worry about our on-operation response. Actually, we don't. I'm going to leave this code around, but as you are going to see in a second, my master plan is going to come together in a moment here. We're not going to need this method anymore, but I'll leave it around just so I can reference back to the code. Our register method and our login method, what I'm going to do is, on application quit, I'm going to cut this and move it over to my network manager. Always make sure you disconnect your Photon peer when the application quits. That's an important thing to do. So let's rewrite my login method. So here's what it looks like, and let's make it look better. I'm going to say network manager dot instance dot dispatch. I'm going to pass in a new login command, passing in my email or my login email and my login password. Then I'm going to pass in a delegate of response. I'm going to say if the first thing I'm always going to do is I'm going to say state, or let's see here. What are my states again? I have form and error, sending, and success. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say if response is valid, and I'm completely aware that this property isn't implemented yet. Say if response is valid, then set the state to success. Otherwise, set the state to error, and then set my error to response dot, what do we want to call this error, or this method? To, well, we could do dot to string. Well, to error string. There we go. The reason why a lot of this code isn't in the base library is because it's not shared between the server and the client. Keep in mind that the command, well, except for the command context, which again, that's something that I'm sort of winging right now. But the command handlers and the other things, actually it's just the command handlers, it's not going to be in the base because the base is shared between client and server. And also, I passed in email and password as parameters, not as fields. So this is what I want my login method to look like. And you'll notice that it does look a little bit slightly longer than it did before, but in reality it's shorter because now I no longer have this on-operation response method. So the whole idea is that my login method will, well, just be here, and it'll contain all the functionality that it needs in order to perform the login command, and it won't necessitate that I create an on-operation response. Well, this is what I'm doing right now. I am making a two-way communication in a generic way that we can just share. But I'm putting everything kind of where I'm writing it for reasons of simplicity of the code. So I don't get bogged down with dealing with other things at the moment. I just want to get this kind of out of the way. So the cool thing about this is, so let's go ahead and implement this dispatch method. The first thing I need is to finish my command context because my command context doesn't have an isValid and it doesn't have a toError string method on it. So let's go ahead and add those. In my command context, I'm going to add a isValid. IsValid, I'm going to do get private set, and then I'm going to calculate isValid in the constructor, just so it doesn't have to be calculated every time. Say isValid equals operation errors.any or property errors.any t value.any. And ReSharper is going to complain about possible multiple enumerations of IEnumerable, but I don't care, and I'm going to suppress it with a comment because I'm fully aware of what I'm doing, and I don't need ReSharper telling me what to do right now. So now that I've done that, now I'm going to go ahead and implement my dispatch method so that it follows this signature. Again, I wrote this invocation of the method before I actually wrote the method, which is a very handy way to work. So let's look at that method. So here's my dispatch. Dispatch of tResponse takes in an I command of tResponse. Then it's also going to take an action of command context of tResponse called action. Oh, I forgot to implement my toError string. Hold on. My toError string is going to, whoops, I want the toError string on my base command context. So toError string is just going to return, I don't know, string.concat new line property errors I don't know, I'm just kind of winging it right here. I don't really care what this looks like. All I want to do is write a method that returns a single string representing all of the errors that were passed in. Oh, what am I doing there? There, string.join operation errors.select t goes into blah blah t. What did you do? Surrounded string format. There you go. And then t.key, or that's not going to work, is it? Because I did it backwards. Sorry about that. I'm concatenating the operation errors and I'm selecting from the property errors, so I can do t.key and then string.join comma of t.value.toArray. And the reason I need to do that ugly toArray at the end of all of this is because Unity uses .NET 3 and or 3.5, and .NET 3.5 does not have a string.join method that takes in an IEnumerable of strings. It only has a string.join method that takes in an array of strings. Yeah, I know, sometimes I feel like I'm writing in Lisp. Here, I can make this look a little bit nicer. There you go. So all this method is going to do is it's going to return me a list of all the errors in a string format. Again, the only reason I'm putting this in here is because I'm too lazy to go ahead and write the client, because the client is as straightforward as I need it to be. So here's my dispatch method that takes in a command that passes back a response. It's .NET 4.5 that has string.join IEnumerable of t. I thought it was .NET 4 that did. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's .NET 4 because I know it's not .NET 3.5. So I now have a dispatch that allows me to consume the response, but I also need a dispatch that allows me to not have a response, which is just going to take in an action of command context action. So here are my two dispatch methods. So now what I need to do is I need to kind of write the glue code that takes any invocation of this dispatch method and turns it into an operation request that gets sent, that gets sent to this in a way that will allow me to deserialize the command and consume the response. So let's see. What I want to do right now is, this code's so ugly because of all these annoying overrides. How do I want to approach this? Well, let's just write this and then refactor it into a method in a moment. First thing I'm going to need is I'm going to need JSON.NET on the client. Now here's a problem. What's going to happen if I add a NuGet reference to a Unity generated CS proj? And by overrides, I meant implements. Yeah, poof. They'll all disappear. The next time Unity, it'll work for like a little bit, but then once Unity decides to delete my CS proj and recreate it won't recreate it with my assembly references, and the world ends. The easiest way to do this is I'm going to kind of, this is kind of hacky, but you know what? It'll be, it'll work. I'm going to go ahead and add the JSON.NET reference to my RuneSlinger.base. And what that's going to do is if I look at my Newtonsoft JSON, oh, this is going to be slightly problematic, isn't it? Because that's going to use a different, did they update? I think they did. What is this? Runtime version .NET 4, runtime version .NET 2. Huh. I have no idea what's going to happen when I do this. So let's go, you guys want to see a magic trick? So when I go ahead and build, we get a successful build, but we might get a nasty error on the server when we try to start it, but I don't know if we will. So let's see what happens. What that's going to do is that's going to copy a RuneSlinger Unity assets underscore assembly. That's going to copy Newtonsoft .json.dll into my assemblies folder. And so now I'm going to jump back into my Unity project, but still not going to be there. This is something that's going to annoy you guys. Or, wrong project. Derp. There we go. It's still not going to be here. What do I need to do to get that assembly into my references? Right, sync monodevelop. So the funny thing about it is if all I have to do is actually focus the Unity window, and Unity, having detected the new assets, will automatically sync my project. So all I had to do was switch over into Unity, and then if I go back into Visual Studio, it'll be loaded after it tells me that the CS proj has changed. So if you ever see me do that, that's what I'm doing. I'm switching back to Unity, so Unity will regenerate the CS proj so that I get my reference. But now I have my reference, so let's see how we can go about sending the operation that will result in the server processing this command. What am I doing? Photon beer. Well, let's go ahead and create my parameters. That's not how you spell parameters. Dictionary of byte and object. And so parameters at byte of rune operation code parameter dot command type equals command dot get type dot assembly qualified name. That's important. And then parameters at byte dot rune operation code parameter dot command bytes. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go ahead and create, well, no. Am I? Nah. I'm not going to do that. There's a reason I'm not going to do that. And it's actually a good reason, so don't give me any crap about it. I'm just going to copy and paste this code. I'm not moving it into a static method on my base project for a reason. Then I'm going to copy this guy too. My Alt Tab got out of sync. Where are you, Unity? There you are. Put you down here because you're private and I don't really care much about you. So then I'm going to do, what am I doing? I'm going to go back down to my dispatch. I'm going to say command bytes equals serialized bison command. And then I'm going to say photon peer send or op custom, passing in a byte rune operation code dot dispatch command, passing in parameters of my parameters dictionary, and we're sending reliable. So This method is pretty much going to do the exact same thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to extract this as a method. I'm going to say dispatch command, or how about dispatch internal? So now I have a dispatch internal method, which I'm going to move all the way to the bottom. So I have my dispatch internal and my serialized bison. So now both these two are going to do the same thing. They're going to do the dispatch internal. But what do we do with the action? Well, we basically are going to be registering a callback for when the operation response comes in. Because I'm not worrying about concerns, many of them actually, I'm kind of willfully ignoring them. I'm going to write this as simple as possible just because we don't have the time to get into this a little bit better. So we'll finish this up and make this a little bit more robust a little bit later. I hope you guys can see the problem with the code that I'm about to write. Private, or what am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. I'm thinking. Because our on-operation response is going to do this. It's going to say var response code equals rune operation response dot operation code. If response code equals fatal error, debug dot log error, you broke the server. Otherwise, if response code equals invalid, then debug log error, invalid command. Otherwise, it's successful, which I'm going to represent in a else if, just in case the serialization or the conversion didn't go on properly. So else if command dispatched. So what happens when a command gets dispatched? Well, what we need to do is we need to deserialize the operation errors and the property errors, and then we need to optionally deserialize the response. So I'm going to say var operation, or actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a helper method that helps me deserialize objects in JSON. Which I'm going to move this code off to the side just so I can reference it simultaneously. Jump back into Unity C#. So I have my serialized bison, then I'm going to have a private T object deserialized bison, which takes in a T object type parameter, and then will also take in a byte array of bytes, and it'll also take in a type of type, which it actually doesn't need to because that can be generated from the parameter, or from the generic parameter, which, come to think of it, I don't want to do that. And you guys will see why in a moment. So I'm going to say var using var ms equals new memory stream passing in bytes. Then I'm going to say JSON serializer deserialize, pass in a new bison reader with the ms, passing in the type, and then return. And then there's our deserialized bison helper method. So sorry, I'm getting a little bit rushed right here just because we're short on time. So command dispatch, what we need our operation errors, which is going to be deserialized bison. The bytes are going to be byte of operation response dot parameters at byte rune operation response parameter dot operation errors with a type of IEnumerable of string. And then, actually, you know what? I'm going to write two of these methods. I have my deserialized bison that's non-generic, and then I want to create a deserialized bison that is generic just because I'm like that. So now I have two types, two helper methods, deserialized bison, deserialized bison. One takes in a generic parameter, the other one just takes in a type. We'll be using both of these. So the one that takes in a type parameter will be the one I'm using right here. So it'll be deserialized bison. We are deserializing an IEnumerable of string for our operation errors. And then we have our property errors, which will be a deserialization of an iDictionary of type string and IEnumerable of type string and, oh, I need to import iDictionary, don't I? IEnumerable, do I? Did I? Why? Huh, I don't know. I think ReSharper is starting to get really annoyed at me and kind of messing up. So now I have my operation errors and my property errors. Then I want to go ahead and say byte, response bytes, and then I'm going to say if operation response dot parameters try get value, which this isn't going to work right, is it? Operation bytes object. This code is going to be a bit nasty, but you know what the great thing about this code being nasty is? Because no matter what, this code was going to be nasty, but at least we're putting it somewhere where we can reuse it over and over and over again. So the key is going to be a byte of rune operation response parameter dot command response, and the value is going to be out response bytes object. Hooray for reusing nasty code. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, some code you just can't get away from iDictionary of string of IEnumerable of string, but if you only have to write it once, then you only have to write it once, which, yeah. So if we have a response, then I'm going to do one of two things. I'm going to go ahead and, like I said, we'll revisit this later because you guys are automatically going to see a problem with it. But when I do a dispatch, I'm going to set a callback, and I'm going to have that callback hoist this callback. And because that callback will hoist this callback, then the callbacks will just all work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a private action of command context. What am I doing? Whatever. I don't care about this code. This code's ugly anyway. Command callback. And when we dispatch here, I'll say command callback equals context action context. I don't know why I wrote that out the long way. However, here things get a little bit more complicated. Command callback equals context, which, how do we get the response back? I need two. I need a command callback for when there's no response, and then I need a private action command context of, it's not covariant. It can't be, can it? There. Command callback of operation response. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say command callback equals, actually no. Command callback is going to be a dictionary of byte and object. There we go. And then we're going to hoist that up. So I'm going to say params, which I can't do because it's a keyword. So I have to spell it out, which I hate spelling that dumb word. Parameters, and then I'm going to basically say var, or just action of new command context, passing in deserialized bison of IEnumerable of string, passing in parameters at byte cast of rune operation. This is getting ridiculous. Blah, blah, blah. We're passing in operation errors. And then what's this complaining about? Oh, right, I have to cast this to a byte array, don't I? Ooh. Really? What don't you like? IEnumerable string is not assignable to type of iDictionary of IEnumerable string, because I'm asking for my property errors before I ask for my other errors. I just want to get done with this code. Argument of object is not assignable to byte array. There, you happy now? No, he's not happy. What does he want now? Because I'm missing that. Great, now what do you want? String is not Wow, I'm just confusing myself here. I've been typing for way too long. iDictionary of IEnumerable of string. Property errors. There we go. Now we're getting somewhere. So that was horribly embarrassing, and I can break this out into a single thing. Wow, that really shouldn't have taken as long to write as it did, but it took that long, so whatever. So on my other one, it's going to be the same thing, except for I'm doing an action of command context of tResponse. So I'm passing in my operation errors and my property errors, but I'm also passing in a tResponse. So I'm instantiating a command context of tResponse, and then for my tResponse, I'm going to say deserialize bison, tResponse, and then, which may be null. So I have to handle that case. So I have to break this out into a multi-line lambda, which I'm not getting any favors from the formatting department here. So then I say tResponse, response, if parameters contains key, byte at rune operation response parameter dot command response, then response equals deserialize bison tResponse passing in a cast of byte array of parameters at another cast of byte rune operation response parameter dot command response. Otherwise, it's going to equal default tResponse. There. And the code's still not perfect. The problem is if you dispatch two commands at the same time, only the last command will get its callback invoked. But we'll be worrying about that next week. So finally, all I have to do is delete all this code that I originally wrote and say command callback operation response dot parameters. Missing semicolon. Indeed. Thanks. And you know what? I didn't even use this method once, even though I thought I was. Well, that's what happens when you see me coding on the fly like this. I'm going to leave it in there just because it could be, well, nah. Just rewrite it if I never need it again. So here's our network manager. Now what we can do is we can shoot our commands to our server and we can get a synchronous result. And I know this code isn't perfect. The reason this code isn't perfect is because the command callback will be overridden if you try to dispatch two commands at the same time. But fortunately, we won't be doing that for now. And so I can go back to the game manager. And I can go ahead and delete my on operation. I can delete all of this stuff because this stuff is now being handled by the Rune peer. And now all I'm left with is a single method that isn't going to work yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment this out temporarily, fix all the code that I'm sure is broken with my login, which I should have done testing for this, but I wasn't envisioning this to take this long, and then write our register method. But anyway, this code's pretty though, isn't it? Come on, someone tell me this code's pretty. There we go. Thank you. And just because this code is written on the backs of lots of horrible code doesn't matter, because this code is something that once I do fix the problem with the not being able to invoke a command or 2 commands simultaneously, then this code will pretty much be finished, and we won't have to worry about it. We will have to worry about the on event later, but for now we don't have to worry about any of this. So yeah. Oh, and the final thing I want to do is I want to put in a private string display username. And then I want to change the game manager state to logged in. So we'll have a logged in state and we'll have a display username property that what I'm going to do is if state equals logged in, then say success plus display username. And what's display username going to be set to? Display username is going to be set to response.username. And again, that's the beauty of generic type inference. So yeah, let's see what happens. Now we did get a thing on the forums. So stepping back for one quick moment, we did get a thing in the forums. You guys remember how I had to kind of rebuild my class or my Photon server twice in order to get that message that I wanted? Like I would get the ending message, but I wouldn't get the start message. Well, there's a dude in the forums, Dak Daniels, I believe, who posted, let me see if I find it. I can't remember what forum he posted it in. There we go. So I suggest you all go and read this. It goes over something that I haven't really talked about, but the fact is that when you restart Photon, what happens is it actually launches the new instance and then shuts down the second instance afterwards just to make sure it can close all the connections. But when you take that behavior, you combine it with the fact that Log4net actually by default establishes exclusive locks on the file, you get it to where, well, you don't get log messages basically. And so go ahead and read through all this. Basically, all the fix is we have to add in a locking model to our log4net.config, and that'll make it so we can actually log. So the fact was the server was restarting properly, it's just the logger wasn't restarting properly. And unfortunately, like I explained in my response to this, is that I had a log4net configuration I copied around to every single Photon project that happened to include this particular line, which for some reason I thought was the default, which it isn't. So, thanks to Dak, we can now make it so we don't have to rebuild harder. So I'm going to go down, read that forum post. I'm going to go into log4net.config and I'm going to add that parameter to both of my appenders. So let's go ahead and launch my logs. And then let's go ahead and launch Photon, which where's Photon hiding? There you are. And let's run it and see what happens. It'll probably break. I'm surprised no one's like, I'm surprised no one here has been yelling at me for not unit testing any of this, because I totally should have. The reason I didn't was I didn't think it would take this long. Okay, application started, which is good. Let's go ahead and launch Unity and see what happens. Internal compiler error. I think that's because of my JSON.NET. I believe I do have to change my project compatibility over to, let's see if this fixes it. I'm pretty sure it will. Sorry, I'm getting significantly less articulate right now as the time progresses. Okay, what are you complaining about? Yeah, I know it's not allowed to use, but I shouldn't be using anything that's .NET. First of all, let's make sure you do build. And then let's go through your references and make sure that you are runtime version of 2, runtime 2, runtime 2, runtime 2, version 2, version 2. So the runtime version is 2 on everything, which is, by the way, just in case you guys don't know, .NET runtime version numbers are all screwed up. 3 and 3.5 did not introduce a new runtime version, so that means that, yeah, 2 is the runtime that we want to be targeting. So all these assembly references are doing .NET version 2, which is .NET 3.5. I don't know, let's try restarting Unity. I have no idea why this would work, but... Oh, hey, look, it works. All I had to do was restart Unity. I'm going to go ahead and change my player back to .NET 2 subset. I do like to stay in subset as long as I can until I run into something that I just can't deal with. And then let me make sure I restart Unity so it makes, reload all. I make sure that it actually takes that change. And then make sure that it still runs, and it does. Okay, so the last thing I need to do is I need to add my network manager to my camera. So now my camera has a network manager and a game manager. So let's go ahead and hit run. See what happens when I try to log in. We get ascending. And that's about all we get. And nothing on the logs. Nothing in either log. So that's interesting. Oh, is it because I'm using the rolling? No, the rolling file appender should work. I mean, I'll try it just for the hell of it, but I've always used the rolling file appender. I don't really like the file appender. I like as much as the rolling file appender. Okay, so application has started. And we get nothing. And we still get nothing. So that most likely means we're not getting anything sent to the server. So let's go ahead and diagnose that issue. If I jump over into, did I remove my connect? I better not have. Why do you have to do this to me, Dragon? Or Christian? Frickin' embarrass me in front of 25 crazy people who decided to stick around this long. And all the future people. Okay, so I forgot to actually connect to the server. That's going to cause problems. And now I get this. Well, that's bizarre. Let's try restarting Photon or Unity again and see what happens. Well, at least now it's consistent. This isn't going to give me information. You know what I'm sure the problem is? I'm almost certain the problem has to do with the fact I brought in JSON.NET, and JSON.NET doesn't like the subset. So I'm just going to go into my Edit, Project Settings, Player, go down to Other Settings in your build, and then change it from .NET 2 subset to .NET 2. And then I'm going to save this, I'm going to close this, I'm going to reopen this, and then I'm going to run. And hey, look, it runs. Not only does it run, we now get a peer created at, which that's nice. Okay, so when I hit login, I get a JSON serialization exception. You cannot deserialize a current JSON object into type IEnumerable of string, because the type requires a JSON array to deserialize. Hold on. Path blank. Give me your stack trace. Of course you're not going to give me your stack trace. Or do I need to do a list of T to deserialize it? I mean, I'll try, but I've been using JSON.NET for quite a while, and I've always been able to deserialize enumerables like that, and it'll back up. Maybe I was just because I was using different settings. What's the setting that you're referring to that allows me to do that? Object creation handling. I don't have to look through some code. Okay, well fine, I'll just use the list because I don't want to look at this code anymore. And then let's see what happens. Into type, yeah, same error. Okay, so when you get, it might be the server, what? Yeah, I want those to be IEnumerables anyway. Serializing IEnumerable there should result in an array. Let's see here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and debug the server and see what's going on, because I'm not seeing any output. So I'm going to go into the server, I'm going to jump into RunePeer, and I'm going to set a breakpoint right here, and I'm going to debug the server. So I'm going to go to debug, attach to process, which I might need to be an administrator to do this if I recall. Jump down to Photon socket server, attach, which I do need to be administrator, so give a sec while Visual Studio restarts. You know what, I bet it is. I bet it's just because I forgot, or I mismatched a parameter with the enums. I bet you that's what it is. That's what it always is. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and attach to Photon. So I'm going to attach to process. I think I did do a debugging workshop at one point, and I did go over attaching to processes. Photon socket server, and then let's go ahead and go into Unity. I'm going to move this off screen and hit run. Then I'm going to send the login, and we do get the server being hit. So we get the command type, and the command type is a login command. That's good. We get the command bytes. We deserialize the command, and it deserializes properly. We get the handler. The handler does the handle. It raises a property error, which results in my property errors now having a count of 1 with the email saying it's required. So that's good. Then we do our parameters. Our response is null for some reason. What? Oh, of course it's null because I never set it to anything. I serialize my property errors. And let's see what happens when I go ahead and do JSON serializer dot serialize. What can I pass into you? I have to pass you a text writer. So if I do JSON convert dot serialize object command context dot operation errors, what do I get? I get that. If I do property errors, I get that. So that's all good. That's all figuring it out properly. And then I dispatch send operation response passing in the parameters. So that's all good. Operation errors equals operation errors, property errors equals property errors, command response equals response. That's all good. I wish I had a unit test for this. I feel really dirty not having a unit test for this, to be honest. On operation response, command callback, what does this do? This checks to see if it has a command response. Otherwise, it does property errors, operation errors, so byte parameters, and then it does deserialize bison, instantiates that, JSON deserializer, new bison reader memory stream. Oh, ha, 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 ha. Well, no, maybe. I don't know. Let's try. Am I still debugging over here? I think I am. No, I'm not. Good. Nope, still failing. And it's not giving me a stack trace, because if it gave me a stack trace, then, well, then it would be just too easy. Let's see here. Is response an empty array or null? I believe it's an empty array. Let me go ahead and take both these guys and pull them out to variables. This is property errors. This is operation errors. Oh, ReachHarbor, why are you doing this to me? There we go. Let's see, we get 5 and 33. That is working. Wait a sec, how many times am I invoking deserialized bison? Just that many times. See, look, I'm getting a 33 bytes and then 5 bytes. I think that's pretty much means it's not empty or null. I have no idea. It's not giving me a stack trace. Lambdas shouldn't matter, but I need lambdas to do the hoisting. I'm going to move temporarily. So everybody just look away while I do this horrible debugging operation. Temporarily, I'm going to go into here and okay, now let's see what happens. Hopefully this will give me a stack trace, because if it doesn't, there's very little I can do, really. Login, let's see, and you don't give me a stack trace. Wait a sec, is even running this code? Or, oh, because I'm still invoking command callback. Derp. Give me a stack trace. I want my unit tests. I've officially learned my lesson. Not showing me a stack trace either. And we're back. So what happened was, there was a small issue with a thing that I just discovered about Bison. And Bison does not allow you to differentiate between a deserialized array and a deserialized object. As a result, you have to explicitly tell the Bison reader if you are deserializing an array or an object. So, fortunately, there is a handy little parameter called read root value as array. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to expose that parameter as a parameter to my deserialized Bison method called isArray. I'm going to set it to false by default, and then I'm just going to pass that right into my Bison reader. And then unfortunately, I also have to pass in a date-time handling, which I'm going to do right now. I believe the default is local, if I'm not mistaken. So now that I've done that, I can jump all the way up to my 2 times that I invoke Bison, deserialized Bison passing an array, and I can just set that parameter, if I can find the right curly brace, or find the right parenthesis, to true. And now that I've done that, I can open up Unity, hit run, hit login, and for some reason I get a success. Object reference not set to an instance of an object. That's probably because the result is null. It's not, the isValid is probably backwards. Yeah, the isValid is backwards. The isValid actually should be inverted, because it's not valid if there are any operation errors or any property errors. You see why I'm regretting unit testing this? You know, it seems that some things are so incredibly trivial, but mistakes like this do propagate. And so this has been a public service announcement for why you should unit test things. I'm also going to fix that in my command context is valid. If I can type, which I can't do anymore. So rebuild the server, wait for the server to spool back up, and it has. So jump back here, hit run, hit login, and hey, look, I got an error. Error, system collection generic list of 1 system string email required. That's probably because I am my lazy little 2 error string method that I wrote. Does a string.concat, but of course string.concat doesn't take an IEnumerable of strings, so I have to convert this to an array. So now I jump back into Unity, hit run. Hey look, I now get error, email is required. If I type in email, error, password is required. If I type in a password, then error, invalid email or password. Now if I do this correctly, Nelson Nat, with the password of test, password of Nelson, password of whoa, what was my password again? I totally forgot my password. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and fix up my register command. So let's jump back into RuneSlinger and let's make a register command. And then we'll be done. So I'm going to go into commands. I'm going to create a register command. Register command is going to implement a command. It's going to have a response of public class register. Now I'm getting a ton of lag on my keyboard. The response is going to take a UID which is going to be the ID of the user that was created as part of the registration. Registration is going to take in a username, password, an email. I kind of like the email being first, then username, then password. So here's my register command. Now that I've created a command, I have to create the corresponding handler. So I'm going to create a register handler. Register handler is going to be an iCommand handler of type register command, which is going to take in an iSession called database. And then I have to go ahead and implement the register. Let's see if did I keep that code around? I don't think I did. The reason I didn't keep that code around is because I can always jump back into Git and go into my Rune peer, do a comparison, and copy and paste all of my old registration code into here. And then is null or white space command username, command password, command email. I'm going to be lazy and use this as, or do this as context.raise operation error. If command.username is length, or length is greater than that, then I'll do context.raise property error username. And then because this is now redundant, I'm going to say username, then must. And then I'm going to do command email, and then I'm going to do context raise property error email, which I'm getting that horrible keyboard lag here, which is making it very, very difficult to type. And then I'm going to do underscore database query on user, and let's import my entity user, bring in link, do context.username, or sorry, it's not context.username, it's command username equals command email. And I'll do context raise operation error, and then finally command username, command email, command password, underscore database save, context.set response, new register response user.id. So there's my register handler. The last thing I need to do, which I'm going to start getting really annoyed at because I have to do this every time, is I need to go ahead and write register. So register command equals command as register command, else if does not equal null, new register handler session dot execute dot handle command context and then register command. So that's all the code I had to add. Keep in mind that what we're doing here is one of the most, hold on, this is bugging me. That's bugging me too. There we go, it's bugging me less. One of the attributes of a code base that is good to work with is that you shouldn't have to change code very often. There's an interesting, I believe it's an article somewhere online called like write only code, but the idea is that to add functionality to a system, you should only have to add code. You shouldn't have to modify code. And we just saw an example of that, where all I had to do was add a register command object class, as well as a register response class. Then I had to add a register handler. So all I did to add a new feature was add code. Now, we did have to go in and modify code right here, but I've already talked about how this is going to be factored out shortly. So yeah, that's an attribute. So if you guys didn't notice that, all I had to do, other than this bit of code, which I'm not going to have to do very soon, was add code in order to add a feature, and that is definitely an attribute of code that you want to write. See, previously we would have to modify a lot of code in order to add an additional command, which we saw an example of last week. But instead, all the new code went into their own self-contained classes, and yeah. So now I can go back into the client after I rebuild my server. I can jump back into the client, and of course my game manager I'm going to have to modify code, but it's UI code, and UI code is just gross. So now I'm going to do state equals sending, and now let's use our awesome network manager instance dispatch, passing in a new register command, passing in email, username, password, then say if response is valid, state equals logged in, display username equals username, otherwise state equals error, and error equals response to error string. So yeah, now our code is actually our client code is actually significantly cleaner, and our server code is significantly cleaner. Let's go ahead and see if this even works. So if I hit register, I get all fields are required. So let's say username of Nelson, email of Nelson, password of test, register. And we get username and email must be unique. So let's do Nelson12, Nelson12. Okay, so we've logged in. Now let's go ahead and try to do this again, and I'm going to pass in Nelson12 at 3dbuzz.com test, and we've logged in. So our register command works, and our login command works. And believe it or not, the code is a lot cleaner than it was before, because now all of the logic relating to, I just want to point this out from the client perspective now, all of the logic related to logging in is now held within one method. As opposed to before, if you guys noticed, we had to not only write a method that created the quote login command underquote, or close quote, words hard, underquote, what's an underquote? I don't know. It's like a subscript quote or something. I'm sure people like English majors right now are throwing up. Anyway, the idea is that we have all the logic contained into one method as opposed to spread across two methods. So we did get a question about, so eventually be just as easy as adding the command type to the IOC container, right? How much grunt work are you going to need to add new commands once the framework is more complete? What I'm most likely going to do is annotate each one of my handlers with a attribute, or maybe even not, and then just scan the assembly, and then automatically register anything that implements iCommand handler of command. So at that point, adding a command will just be a matter of creating the command ETO, optionally creating a response ETO, then creating the handler, and then that's it. Next week, I don't know. My brain is so fried right now that I can't think that far ahead. So yeah, I guess that just about wraps stuff up. Next week, I actually do want to focus on creating the lobby, because right now we don't have the concept of whether or not a user is logged in at all. We don't have if they're in the lobby or not. I'm going to be using a very similar pattern to what Unity uses with components, and basically being able to attach components to our peers and have them be able to contain data that our command handlers will be able to process. That's going to introduce some interesting challenges in regards to multi-threading, which will also be addressed. Also, I will be making this code, this command callback, which results in my code not being able to handle more than 2 command dispatches simultaneously. I'll be fixing that up as well. So I think that's about it for all the future people. I guess well, Unity has issues with multi-threading, sure, but the server is multi-threaded. So, yeah, I think that's about it for all the future people. So I will see you guys all later.